Your mother's been asking strange questions again? Diane said over the phone. About things that already happened. Things she decided last month. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips. My sister's voice carried that particular tone, the one she used when she thought I wasn't listening carefully enough. The one that made me feel small. What kind of questions? I asked. She called me yesterday, asking if I remembered the beach house decision. We talked about it together, Jadina. You were there. You agreed it was time to sell. Now she's saying she never wanted to sell it. The mug felt suddenly heavy in my hand. I set it down on the counter, my fingers lingering on the ceramic rim. Diane was waiting for my response. My other sister, Constance, was probably listening on the extension. She always did when Diane called about family matters. She's just having a moment, I said carefully. We all forget things sometimes. That's what I thought too. But then she asked me if I was sure about the conversation. She asked me 3 times, Jadina. 3 times in one phone call. She kept saying, "Are you absolutely certain? Because I don't remember it that way." The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of traffic outside my window on Maple Street. My home of 23 years. The place where I'd raised my daughter alone after her father left. The place where I'd built a life that felt solid and real. Maybe she's stressed about the sale, I offered. That's exactly what I thought. So I asked her directly. I said, "Mom, are you worried about the move?" And she said, and I'm quoting her exactly, "I'm worried that my daughters are conspiring against me. I'm worried that Jadina is making me think I want things I don't want." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, touching everything. She said that? She said that. And Constance heard it too. We're both concerned, Jadina. We think maybe you should talk to her about seeing a doctor. We think maybe the stress of the business is catching up with you, and you're taking it out on her. Taking it out on her? Diane, I barely see her. I've been working 70-hour weeks trying to keep the accounting firm running. I haven't even had time to... That's exactly what we're saying. The stress. It's making you sharp with her. Making you push things on her. She said you called her last Tuesday and told her the house was becoming too much for her to handle. She said you made it sound like she couldn't manage it anymore. I opened my mouth, closed it. Last Tuesday, I had called my mother. We'd talked about the house. She'd been the one who brought it up. She'd said the stairs were getting harder. She'd said she wanted to move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to maintain. She'd said it at least 5 times during that conversation. I'd listened. I'd asked questions. I'd supported her decision. That wasn't pushing. That was being a daughter. Diane, that's not what happened. Mom brought it up. I was supporting her choice. See, this is what I mean. You're already defensive. You're already making it sound like we're attacking you. That's what she said you'd do. She said you'd twist the story and make it sound like she wanted it all along. The kitchen tilted slightly. I reached for the counter, my palm flat against the cool granite. When had my mother said that? When had she talked to my sisters about me? Has she been calling you? Calling Constance? Of course she has. She's your mother, Jadina. She's worried. We're all worried. She's worried that something's wrong with you, that you're not thinking clearly, that maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional. The implications of those words spread through me like cold water. They thought I was losing my mind. Not my mother. Me. My sisters. The 2 people I'd known my entire life, who'd grown up in the same house, who shared my DNA and my history. They thought their older sister was mentally unstable. I'm not the one losing my mind, I said quietly. I'm the one being gaslit. There you go again. Attacking us. Making us the bad guys. This is exactly what Mom warned us about. She said you'd turn this around and make us seem like we're the problem. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen with my cold coffee and my shaking hands, and I realized that everything had already changed. The narrative had already shifted. The story was already being rewritten, and I was the villain in a story I hadn't written. That was the moment I understood. My daughter had been very busy. Her name was Victoria, and she was 32 years old. She had my eyes, dark brown with that particular intensity that made people take her seriously. But she had her father's stubbornness. She had his ability to hold a grudge. She had his gift for making people believe his version of events. I'd raised her alone after Derek left. I'd worked full-time at the accounting firm while also managing her childhood, her education, her emotional needs. I'd been present at every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I'd made her lunch every single morning before school. I'd helped her through her first heartbreak, her college applications, her quarter-life crisis when she realized she didn't want to be a lawyer after all. She'd moved back home 2 years ago, after her own failed engagement, after she'd quit her marketing job, after she'd decided she needed to find herself and that living with her mother while she figured things out was the best solution. I'd said yes immediately. I'd been thrilled to have her home. I'd thought it meant we'd finally have time together, real time, not just holiday visits and birthday dinners. I'd been wrong about so many things. The first sign should have been small enough to dismiss. She'd asked me one morning if I remembered telling her that her grandmother, my mother, was becoming forgetful. I hadn't said that. I'd never said that. I'd mentioned once, in passing, that my mother had forgotten to pay a bill and asked me to help her organize her finances. That wasn't the same as saying she was forgetful. That was just asking for help from a daughter who works in accounting. But Victoria had seized on it. She'd called my mother that very afternoon. I knew because my mother mentioned it when I called her that evening. Victoria had asked her if she was worried about her memory, if she'd been having trouble remembering things, if she thought maybe she should see a neurologist. "Why would she ask me that?" my mother had said, confused and slightly hurt. "I'm perfectly fine. I just forgot to pay one bill." I'd laughed it off. Victoria was always dramatic. She always saw problems where none existed. It was probably just her being concerned, her being caring in that intense way she had. But then the questions started. Victoria would mention things in conversations with my mother, things that seemed innocent on the surface. She'd say, "Mom mentioned you've been having trouble with the stairs lately. That must be really scary for you." My mother would respond with concern, suddenly aware of something she hadn't been worried about before. Within days, she'd be telling me that the stairs were becoming difficult. Within weeks, she'd be convinced that the house was becoming too much for her. I didn't see it happening in real time. I was too busy. I was too focused on keeping the accounting firm afloat during a recession. I was too grateful that Victoria seemed to be taking an interest in family matters, seemed to be becoming closer to her grandmother. By the time I realized what was happening, the foundation had already shifted beneath me. The beach house was the catalyst. My mother had owned it for 30 years. It was a small cottage in a quiet coastal town, nothing fancy, but it held memories. My father had proposed to her there. My sisters and I had spent summers there as children. Victoria had spent her childhood summers there too. The house was part of our family's story, but it was also expensive to maintain. Property taxes had gone up. The roof needed work. The plumbing was aging. My mother had mentioned casually that maybe it was time to let it go. Maybe it was time to sell and use the money to make her life easier in other ways. I'd agreed. I'd helped her research real estate agents. I'd started looking at the numbers, thinking about the logistics. It seemed like a reasonable decision. My mother was 74 years old. She didn't need a second home. She needed simplicity. Then Victoria had started asking my mother questions. Gentle questions. Concerned questions. Do you really want to sell the house, Grandma? Or do you feel like Mom is pushing you to sell it? Because you know you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, right? My mother had started to hesitate. She'd started to second guess. She'd started to wonder if maybe she did want to keep the house. Maybe she wasn't ready to let it go. Maybe her daughter was right. Maybe she was being pushed into a decision she didn't actually want to make. By the time I realized what had happened, my mother had called the real estate agent and canceled the listing. She'd told me she'd changed her mind. When I'd asked her why, she'd been vague. She'd said she needed more time to think about it. I'd pressed. I'd asked her directly if Victoria had said something that changed her mind. My mother had looked at me with hurt in her eyes and said, "Why would you try to make me doubt my own daughter? Why would you try to come between us?" That's when I'd called my sisters. That's when everything had started to fall apart. I spent the next week trying to understand what was happening. I called my mother every day. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Everything I said was being filtered through a lens that Victoria had created. Everything I did was being interpreted as evidence of my mental instability. "You called me 3 times yesterday," my mother said one evening. "That's not normal behavior, Jadena. I called because I wanted to talk to you. Daughters call their mothers. You called because you were checking up on me. You were trying to make sure I wasn't talking to Victoria about you." I couldn't argue with that logic because it was circular. Anything I said would be used as proof of my guilt. Any denial would be seen as defensive behavior. Any attempt to explain my actions would be twisted into further evidence of my instability. I started documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet. I noted down every conversation, every decision, every interaction. I wrote down what I'd said and what my mother later claimed I'd said. I tracked the timeline of Victoria's involvement in each situation. I was building a case, though I wasn't entirely sure who I was building it against or what I was trying to prove. The accounting firm suffered. I couldn't concentrate. I'd be in meetings with clients, and my mind would be somewhere else. I'd be reviewing financial statements, and I'd suddenly think about something Victoria had said, some comment that had seemed innocent at the time, but now seemed deliberately calculated. I'd be driving home, and I'd rehearse conversations in my head, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong, what I'd done to make my own daughter turn my family against me. My business partner, Marlene, finally confronted me about it. We'd been working together for 15 years. She knew me better than almost anyone. "You're not yourself," she said one afternoon. We were in her office, the door closed. "You're making mistakes. You're missing deadlines. You forgot about the Henderson audit entirely. That's not like you." "I know. I'm sorry. There's some family stuff going on." "Family stuff that's making you question your own sanity?" I looked at her. I hadn't told her anything specific. I hadn't mentioned Victoria or my mother or my sisters, but Marlene was smart. Marlene paid attention. "How did you—" "Because I've known you for 15 years and I've never seen you like this. You're doubting yourself constantly. You're second-guessing every interaction. You're acting like someone who's been systematically convinced that they can't trust their own perception of reality. That's not a normal response to family stress, Jadina. That's a response to psychological manipulation." I sat down in her chair. I felt like I was falling. My daughter is making my family think I'm mentally unstable, I said quietly. She's doing it so carefully that I can't even prove it. Every time I try to explain what's happening, it sounds like I'm paranoid. It sounds like I'm the unstable one. Marlene listened while I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know what that's called, right? She said finally. Gaslighting. Exactly. And it's a form of psychological abuse. And you need to do something about it before it destroys you. But what could I do? I couldn't prove it. I couldn't show my sisters or my mother a video of Victoria's manipulation because the manipulation was too subtle. It was in the questions she asked. It was in the way she'd planted seeds of doubt. It was in her consistent, gentle suggestion that I was the problem. I could try to explain it to them, but that would just be more evidence of my instability. A woman convinced that her daughter is orchestrating a conspiracy against her? That sounded like paranoia. That sounded like the kind of thing a mentally unstable person would believe. Victoria had been very, very clever. The breaking point came on a Thursday in November. I was at home, working from my home office, trying to catch up on the work I'd let slide. My mother called me. Her voice was tight with emotion. I need you to come over, she said. Right now. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine, but I need to talk to you about something important. And I need you to listen without getting defensive. The drive to her house took 15 minutes. I spent those 15 minutes trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. I'd learned that with my mother now, there was always a script. There was always a version of events that had been carefully constructed before I arrived. She was waiting for me in her living room. She looked smaller than I remembered. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been crying. Sit down, she said. I sat. Victoria came to see me today. She's very concerned about you. She's been doing some research, and she thinks you might be experiencing early onset dementia. She thinks that your behavior lately, the way you've been trying to control my decisions, the way you've been insisting that things happen differently than they did, the way you've been pushing me to make choices I don't want to make. She thinks all of that might be symptoms. I opened my mouth, closed it. The room felt like it was tilting. She showed me some information, articles about cognitive decline, about how sometimes people in their 40s and 50s start to experience memory problems, about how they can become controlling and manipulative without even realizing it, about how the people around them often notice the changes before the person experiencing them does. Mom, that's not. Let me finish. She also told me that you've been telling people that I'm losing my mind, that you've been calling your sisters and suggesting that I'm becoming forgetful, that you've been trying to convince them that I'm mentally unstable so that they won't believe me when I tell them what you're doing. I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I couldn't stay in this room and listen to my own words being twisted into something unrecognizable. That's not what I said. I said you forgot to pay a bill. That's all. That's a normal thing that happens to normal people. But you used it as an example of my decline. You used it to suggest that something was wrong with me. And now Victoria is worried that you're doing the same thing to yourself? That you're creating a narrative where everyone else is the problem and you're the victim? I'm not creating a narrative. I'm trying to protect myself from someone who's actively trying to make me look unstable. See? That's exactly what she said you'd say. She said you'd deny it. She said you'd turn it around and make it sound like Victoria is the one with the problem. She said that's a classic symptom of what you might be experiencing. I left. I walked out of my mother's house and got into my car, and I drove. I drove for hours. I drove until the sun set and the streets became unfamiliar, and I had no idea where I was. I pulled into a parking lot near a shopping center and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to breathe. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. This was the moment where the narrative became official. My mother believed I was mentally unstable. My sisters believed I was mentally unstable. And any attempt I made to defend myself would only be seen as further proof of my instability. Victoria had won. She'd constructed a perfect trap, and I'd walked right into it. I sat in that parking lot for an hour. Maybe two. I watched people come and go from the shops. I watched the sky turn from purple to black. I thought about calling someone, Marlene, a therapist, my sisters, but I knew that anything I said would be used against me. I was trapped in a narrative that I hadn't written, and the only way out was to somehow convince everyone that I was telling the truth. But how do you prove the truth when the narrative has already been set? How do you convince people that you're sane when the evidence against you is so perfectly constructed that it looks like proof of insanity? My phone rang. It was Constance, my younger sister, the one who'd always been quieter than Diane, more thoughtful, more willing to listen. "Hi," she said carefully. "I'm calling because I'm concerned about you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I might say. "Jadina, are you there?" "I'm here," I said finally. "Mom called me. She told me what Victoria said, about the dementia, about you trying to control her decisions." "Constance, that's not what's happening. Victoria is manipulating all of you. She's—" "I know." The words hung in the silence between us. "What?" I said. "I know. I've known for a while. I just didn't know how to tell you without making it worse. I couldn't process this. I couldn't understand how my sister could know and not say anything." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I said something, Victoria would turn it around on me too. I was afraid that she'd start planting doubts about me. And I was afraid that you wouldn't believe me anyway, that you'd think I was just taking sides. But you know what she's doing." "I know. I've been watching her do it for months. I've been watching her ask Mom questions that plant seeds of doubt. I've been watching her call Diane with concerns that are really just suggestions disguised as worry. I've been watching her build this narrative brick by brick, and I've been too much of a coward to say anything." I was crying now. I didn't even realize when it had started. I was sitting in a parking lot in a town I didn't recognize, crying because my sister had just confirmed that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things, that my perception of reality was correct. "I'm sorry," Constance said. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have stood up for you." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you be destroyed by someone's lies. I can't be complicit in this. And I think it's time that someone told the truth." The next morning, I called a family meeting. I told my mother, my sisters, and Victoria that we all needed to sit down and talk. I said it was important. I said I wouldn't take no for an answer. They gathered in my mother's living room on a Saturday afternoon. My mother looked anxious. Diane looked defensive. Constance looked determined. Victoria looked calm. She always looked calm. That was part of her power. She never seemed rattled. She never seemed like someone who had anything to hide. "I want to talk about what's been happening," I said. I'd prepared for this. I'd written down everything. I'd documented the timeline. I'd organized my thoughts so that I could present them clearly, logically, in a way that couldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of an unstable person. I think Victoria has been deliberately manipulating our family. I think she's been asking questions designed to plant seeds of doubt. I think she's been telling each of us different versions of what the others have said. I think she's been creating a narrative where I'm the villain and she's the concerned family member. And I think she's done this deliberately and with full knowledge of what she was doing. Victoria smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that suggested I was being unreasonable. "That's a serious accusation," she said calmly. "It's not an accusation. It's an observation. I have documentation. I have dates and times. I have a record of every conversation where you planted doubt about my mental state." "Mom," Victoria said, turning to my mother. "This is exactly what I was worried about. This is the kind of thing I read about. When someone is experiencing cognitive decline, they often become convinced that other people are conspiring against them. They create elaborate theories to explain why everyone is doubting them. It's a defense mechanism." "No," Constance said firmly. "Stop. Just stop." Everyone turned to look at her. "Victoria, you've been manipulating this family for months. You've been asking leading questions. You've been planting ideas in people's heads. You've been creating a narrative where Jadina is unstable, and you've been doing it deliberately." "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria said. But her calm had cracked slightly. There was an edge to her voice now. "Yes, you do. You know exactly what you're doing. You moved back home because you needed a place to live, and you were out of options. You decided to stay by making yourself indispensable. You decided to do that by turning this family against Jadina, because if Jadina looks unstable, then she's not the one making decisions anymore. Then you have more power." "That's insane," Victoria said. "No, it's not. It's actually very calculated. And it would have worked if you hadn't been so obvious about it." My mother was looking between Constance and Victoria, her face confused. Diane was looking at me, and I could see the moment when her perception shifted. I could see the moment when she realized that she'd been played. "Is this true?" my mother asked me. "Or is this a conspiracy between you and Constance?" "It's true," I said. Constance was too afraid to say anything before, but she's telling the truth now. "How do I know?" my mother said. "How do I know who to believe?" That was the question, wasn't it? After months of manipulation, after having her perception of reality systematically altered, how could she trust her own judgment? "You don't," I said. "Not right now." But you can ask yourself one simple question. Has Victoria ever asked you directly if you wanted something? Or has she always asked you if you thought I wanted you to do something? Has she ever expressed her own opinions? Or has she always expressed concern about what I might be doing? My mother was quiet. She was thinking. I could see her going through conversations in her mind, reframing them with this new information. "I think," Victoria said slowly, "that I should leave. I think it's clear that this family has decided to turn against me. I think I should find somewhere else to live." "That's probably a good idea," I said. She left. She packed her things over the next few days and moved into an apartment across town. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit to anything. She simply left, and in leaving, she confirmed everything I'd said. But the damage was already done. The seeds of doubt that she'd planted didn't disappear just because she was gone. My mother still looked at me with a hint of uncertainty. She still wondered, sometimes, if maybe I had been trying to control her. She still second-guessed her own perceptions. Diane apologized, But it was an apology that came with caveats. She said she was sorry she doubted me, but she also said that maybe I should have communicated better. Maybe I should have been more aware of how my actions might be perceived. Maybe I bore some responsibility for the misunderstanding. I didn't argue with her. I was too tired to argue. Constance became my ally, but in a way that felt fragile. She'd taken a risk by telling the truth, and I knew she was afraid of the consequences. She was afraid that Victoria would retaliate. She was afraid that the family would turn on her next. And I was left with the understanding that the truth isn't always enough. That you can present evidence and documentation and logical arguments, and people still might not believe you. That sometimes the narrative that's been constructed is more powerful than the facts. That sometimes the person telling the story wins, regardless of whether the story is true. 3 months later, I was sitting in a therapist's office. Not because I was mentally unstable, but because I needed to process what had happened to me. I needed to understand how I'd allowed myself to be gaslit so thoroughly. I needed to figure out how to move forward. The thing about gaslighting, my therapist, Dr. Reeves, said, is that it works because it targets something we all struggle with, doubt in our own perception. Victoria was very skilled at making you question yourself. She was very good at making you feel like maybe you were the problem. But I wasn't, I said. No, you weren't. But for a while, you believed that you were. And that's the real damage of gaslighting. It's not that someone lies to you. It's that they make you believe that your own perception of reality is unreliable. How do I trust myself again? You start by recognizing that you were right. Your perception was accurate. Your interpretation of events was correct. Victoria was manipulating your family. That's not paranoia. That's observation. I nodded, but the doubt was still there. It would probably always be there, at least a little bit. The experience had changed something fundamental in me. I'd learned that people I loved could be turned against me. I'd learned that the truth wasn't always enough. I'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who smile while they're hurting you. I also learned that I was stronger than I thought. I'd survived being gaslit by my own daughter. I'd survived having my perception of reality systematically undermined. I'd survived being made to feel like I was losing my mind, and I'd come out the other side with my sanity intact. Victoria and I didn't speak for a long time after that. She tried, occasionally, to reach out. She'd send texts or emails, always apologetic on the surface, but with a subtle dig underneath. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've gotten the help you need. Messages that looked like concern but were really just more gaslighting, more attempts to make me doubt myself. I didn't respond to them. I couldn't. The damage was too fresh, and I knew that any communication would be used as more ammunition against me. My mother and I rebuilt our relationship, but it was different now. There was a wariness to it. She was more careful about what she told me. She was more likely to second-guess her own decisions. Victoria had taken something from both of us, the ability to trust each other completely. Diane and I remained close, but there was a new understanding between us. She'd been fooled, and she knew it. She doubted me when I needed her to believe me. That wasn't something we could fully move past, but we could acknowledge it and try to do better. Constance became my closest confidant. She'd risked the family's disapproval to tell the truth, and that meant something. That meant everything. The accounting firm recovered. I focused on my work again. I rebuilt my reputation with my clients. I started sleeping through the night. I stopped second-guessing every conversation I had with my family. But I never forgot. I never forgot what it felt like to have my own daughter systematically undermine my perception of reality. I never forgot the panic of watching my family believe lies about me. I never forgot the moment when I realized that the person I'd raised, the person I'd sacrificed for, had deliberately tried to destroy my credibility. That lesson stayed with me. It changed how I moved through the world. It made me more aware of manipulation. It made me more careful about who I trusted. It made me understand, in a way I hadn't before, how fragile our sense of reality is. How easily it can be shattered if someone is determined enough and patient enough. A year later, I was sitting in my office at the accounting firm when Marlene came in with coffee. We'd started a ritual. Every Friday afternoon, we'd sit together for an hour and talk about work and life and everything in between. "How are you doing?" she asked, handing me the coffee. "Better," I said. "I'm doing better." "Good, because you deserve to be better. You deserve to have a life where you're not constantly questioning yourself." "I think I'm getting there. It's slow, but it's happening." Marlene nodded. She understood. She'd watched me go through the worst of it, and she'd been there when I came out the other side. "You know what I realized?" I said. "I realized that the worst part wasn't that Victoria was manipulating me. The worst part was that I believed her. I believed that maybe she was right. I believed that maybe I was losing my mind. And that's the real power of gaslighting. It makes you your own worst enemy." "But you figured it out," Marlene said. "You recognized what was happening, and you stopped it. That takes strength." "It took Constance telling the truth," I said. "It took someone being brave enough to say what was really happening." "Maybe, but it also took you being willing to listen. It took you being willing to question the narrative that had been constructed. Not everyone would have done that." I thought about that. I thought about how easy it would have been to just accept what everyone was telling me. To accept that maybe I was the problem. To accept that maybe I should see a neurologist, get tested, accept that my perception of reality was unreliable. But I hadn't. I'd fought. I'd documented. I'd presented evidence. I'd forced my family to confront the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Today, I'm a different person than I was a year ago. I'm more cautious. I'm more aware of manipulation. I'm more likely to trust my own perception of reality, even when other people are telling me I'm wrong. But I'm also more compassionate. I understand now how easy it is to be fooled. I understand how easy it is to doubt yourself when people you love are telling you that you're wrong. I understand the power of gaslighting, and I'm more aware of it when I see it happening to other people. Victoria is still out there. She's still living her life, probably still manipulating people, probably still convinced that she did nothing wrong. I've made peace with the fact that I'll probably never get an apology from her. I've made peace with the fact that she'll probably never admit to what she did. But I've also made peace with myself. I know what happened. I know that my perception of reality was accurate. I know that I'm not losing my mind. And that's enough. If you're experiencing something similar, if someone in your life is making you question your own perception of reality, listen to your instincts. Document everything. Find someone you trust and tell them what's happening. Don't let someone else's narrative become your truth. Hit follow if this hit close to home.